Fareed Zakaria GPS, CNN Sunday morning 10 Eastern and Pacific.
And now for our What in the World segment. What got my attention this week were the dramatic events in Tunisia. They do raise the question, could this Jasmine revolution have an effect across the Arab world? Now, there have been popular revolutions in the Arab world. Nasser toppled the Egyptian monarchy, as did many other popular movements in the 1950s and 60s. But in the end, they all led to dictatorships, never to lasting democracy. It's still too soon to tell for Tunisia, but there is hope of reform and democracy. And if we look at Tunisia not as an isolated episode, but as part of a decade of change, there is a pattern emerging. 10 years ago, the political landscape was bleak in the Arab world. But today, there are sprouts of democracy breaking out all over. This progress is mostly happening as 2 steps back, 1 step forward, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but it is happening. Start with Iraq. While still struggling through deep sectarianism, it has finally a somewhat functional, democratically elected, multi-party government and a vibrant free press. Iran had a contested election and a genuine mass protest movement. The 2009 Green Revolution would have been unimaginable a few years earlier. Lebanon has faltered of late with its government collapsing, but Syria's direct control of that country has ended, and we now have a messy but more open political system, though one in which Hezbollah, a quasi-terrorist organization, is a key player. Countries like Bahrain and Kuwait have flirted with reforms. Egypt has initiated some serious economic reforms. The political system remains closed as ever, but that crucial country faces a moment of truth as Hosni Mubarak faces his last years in office as president. And who knows what might happen in Algeria, Syria, and even Iran over the next 10 years. This sort of striving for democracy is what Arab intellectuals have yearned for, speaking of the freedom deficit in their lands, which is quite true. And of course, George W. Bush set forth to fix the problem with what he called a forward strategy of freedom in the Middle East. Listen to Mr. Bush.
This strategy requires the same persistence and energy and idealism we have shown before, and it will yield the same results. As in Europe, as in Asia, as in every region of the world, the advance of freedom leads to peace. The advance of freedom is the calling of our time. It is the calling of our country.
Now, if Bush's vision does come to fruition, will it be because of America's military pressure or despite it? That's an interesting debate. In Iran, the democracy movement happened thanks to a stolen election and a mass movement. In Lebanon, a political assassination. In Tunisia, it was a middle class that had had enough of a dictator enriching himself while they suffered. In Egypt, it is a burgeoning middle class that doesn't want to see the keys to the kingdom handed down to a dynasty or the army. Democracy comes out of the development of societies, from economic growth, middle-class restlessness, and above all, of course, the political failures of dictators. It can be helped from abroad, but ultimately it is an organic process when it is successful. But give President George W. Bush his due. He saw the problem, and he believed that Arabs were not genetically incapable of democracy, and he put America's moral might behind the great cause of Arab reform.